Our agenda for today is as follows. We're going to start with a brief welcome. We'll hear a bit about anticipated housing needs as we head into kind of uncharted territory with the expiration of the housing moratorium. We'll hear about the governor's eviction diversion initiative, then about implementing programs to stabilize tenants. Then we'll pause for some questions from you, and then we'll segue to our panel of local leaders and staff who are going to talk about their efforts to support residents through this. Then we'll have another Q&A. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark Drayson, Executive Director of MAPC, for some opening remarks.
Karina, thank you very much. I want to thank Karina since she's thanked everybody else. I want to thank Karina and I believe Kasha Hart on our staff as well.
And Sasha Parodi as well.
And Sasha Parodi, who worked very hard to put this together. I was actually on leave last month, so I was quickly brought up to speed last Thursday when I got back to MAPC, back virtually to MAPC, about this production, and was so pleased that it was put together, and that Chris and Amy, particularly from DHCD, have been able to join us to talk about the governor's eviction diversion initiative and related programs. We are in a very, very serious situation, as I think everybody knows. The need across the Commonwealth is tremendous. We actually did a review recently, which I think Tim may mention, about what the level of need is now after the moratorium has expired compared to early in July. And we saw that there were about 5,000 families in need of rental, or households in need of rental assistance back in July when the moratorium was in full force. And when the moratorium expired, we were up to around 25,000 families in need of rental assistance, largely, not exclusively, but largely as a result of the expiration of the expanded unemployment benefits on the federal level. It is so important now that we all work together cooperatively to stand up the elements of the eviction diversion initiative as quickly, but also as efficiently and effectively as we possibly can. It is no small task. I think that a lot of what we speak about today is going to be in the implementation sphere. How do we actually take the resources that have been made available to us and put them into actual effect quickly enough that they will protect some of these families and individuals from eviction? And I also want to note that eviction is only the tip of the iceberg. It's the part that we can track. It's not easy to track, but at least it's trackable. Many households may choose to leave the place that they currently live, not because they're evicted, but because they're afraid of being evicted. And if they double up with families, if they double up with strangers, if they live in overcrowded conditions, that is a very, very bad situation under the best of circumstances, but especially in light of COVID-19. It's not the circumstances that we want to engage in. So I am thankful for everyone who's on the phone today who recognizes by the work they're doing and by the resources they have committed the seriousness of this situation, and is working as hard as they can to try and come up with an equitable and appropriate solution for the residents of the Commonwealth. So thank you all for being with us. Thanks to all the people named Chris, who we seem to have invited to speak today, and I guess we let a few others in as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karina and to Tim. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm actually just going to pass it right over to Tim to keep this moving.
Thank you, Karina. And thanks to all of you for being here today and joining us. My name is Tim Reardon. I'm the Director of Data Services at MAPC, and I want to be brief for a couple of reasons. First, because as Mark said, we want the focus of today's session to really be on identifying solutions and figuring out what we can do to work together to address this crisis. And two, because I know that many, if not all of you, are working on these issues at the local level and are very familiar with how this crisis is affecting individuals and families very directly and personally. And so I don't think that anyone here needs convincing about how dire the situation is, but I did want to spend a couple of minutes providing a little bit of information about the statewide situation, what we know and what we don't about pandemic-related housing need, as a bit of context for the conversation that will take place over the rest of the session. So before I start, I just want to acknowledge the work of Sarah Philbrick, senior research analyst on our team, who's really led a lot of this work and has been instrumental in the findings that I'll show you today. We've been looking at this issue prompted by the city of Boston. We started looking at the needs for housing assistance actually back in March, published our first report in April, and have been updating it, the analysis since then, trying to understand who is affected by the unemployment crisis, how that creates a gap between income, including unemployment income and housing costs, the extent to which CARES Act benefits help, and then what happens when the CARES Act benefits end and the eviction moratorium ends, which is the situation we find ourselves in right now. Our latest findings, published in a report last month, were that we found that according to the Department of Unemployment Assistance, over 330,000 Massachusetts workers were filed what are called continuing claims for unemployment as of September 5th. And then using the methods that we've developed, we estimate that represents about 45,000 renter households and 35,000 owner households who will have trouble covering housing costs this month when you account for the benefits they're receiving from unemployment, other income in the household, and then basic expenses for all the people who were in the household, as well as their reported housing costs. So a tremendous number of households who are in need. The total gap for rental households is about $42 million in October alone. And the challenge here is that by this point, most of these households will have exhausted the stimulus check they received in April, as well as, and many of them may have exhausted their savings funds as well. We do know that assistance is needed all across the Commonwealth. This is not something that's limited to the Boston area or to cities. Over 130 municipalities have an estimated rental housing gap just for renters of over $50,000 per month. And there's 16 cities that have need over $500,000 per month. That's the gap between that unemployment income and what folks need to pay for housing. The CARES Act unemployment enhancements, that extra $600 a week, really did help a lot while it was being received. We estimate that in July, it helped 38% of the affected rental households to keep current on rent. So really only 2 or 3% couldn't close the gap with that when they were getting that $600. And now that's evaporated, and we see that more than 40% of affected rental households, or about 40%, are having a hard time keeping current on rent. All of our information is published online at mapc.org/COVID-19 layoffs. You can find it there, including this map, which shows town by town estimates of people who are unemployed and estimated rental housing needs. And you can download the data, and we'll also be happy to answer questions if folks are trying to use it locally. I do want to note that unemployment claims don't tell the whole story, because we're really only looking at those receiving standard unemployment. We don't really have any information on folks who are receiving pandemic unemployment assistance. That's for independent contractors. Undocumented workers who can't apply for unemployment are not included in here. And then there also could be lots of folks who are no longer unemployed, but they've got reduced hours or reduced wages, back rent that they owe. And so there's a lot of other challenges out there that aren't captured in the analysis we've done. So I guess it's certainly is fair to say that those estimates of 45,000 households in need are conservative, and the scale of the problem may be considerably larger. Another source of information is from a biweekly survey that the Census Bureau has been doing for the last 7 or 8 months, and they found that 1 in 6 renters say that they're behind on their rent, and almost 20% were not confident they could pay rent this month, and over 60,000 rental households fear imminent eviction. Again, it's a lot of problematic outcomes here, which you're probably all aware of. Evictions can lead to people becoming homeless or in overcrowded conditions, where will exacerbate the pandemic. Evictions have negative long-term impacts on renters and on their credit score. And then this crisis can also affect the real estate industry, as small landlords who are missing out on rent may struggle to cover their own mortgage payments and may find themselves in a position of having to sell. And this can accelerate the consolidation of the rental real estate market under the ownership of basically, profit-oriented corporations or LLCs, real estate investment trusts, and over the long term, the loss of what we consider to be
Tim, you just got muted.
All right. Did folks hear the end of that? All right, great. Moving forward, the governor announced their eviction diversion initiative last month. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with that, and housing courts can now begin hearing new eviction cases. And it is very, very hard to get that information. And so we've been working with the Baker administration to try to figure out how we can get more data on actual filings out of the court so that we can monitor what's going on, where assistance is needed, and how many folks are actually experiencing an eviction. Again, all this information is available at mapc.org/COVID-19 layoffs, and you can also email me or tweet at me if you would like, if you have other questions, and I'll turn it back over to Karina.
All right, now we're going to hear from Chris Kluchman, Deputy Director of the Community Services Division at DHCD. I was about to say MAPC. And Amy Steitley, Chief of Programs at DHCD. They're going to share more about the governor's eviction diversion initiative. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Amy's going to share her screen, and we'll walk you through this deck.
So I imagine most of you have seen a good portion of this deck already. It's been around since the announcement of the initiative, which was, the week before the expiration of the state moratorium. But in case you haven't, I'll hit the highlights and give you some updated information about how things have been going over the past few weeks. So first, just how the Eviction Diversion Initiative works is that we've really tried to be very comprehensive about how we invested our funding and programs and information. So, there's a large public awareness campaign that has been very successful in the month of October at getting information out to tenants, landlords, homeowners about what it means to get a notice to quit, what the resources are for rental assistance, what the resources are for mortgage assistance, what the protections are under the CARES Act for 1 to 4 family homeowners. And we really have two main sources of help here. The 211 call centers, who came under contract with DHCD on the 13th of October, and our housing consumer education centers, of which there are 9 throughout the entire state, both of which have seen an explosion in call volume, requests for assistance, and information. So aside from that, we've also created lots of resources, including flyers, social media posts, videos, and been trying to push that out to all of you, our partners, as quickly as possible in multiple language, and I'll hit some links on that. So I think we're doing a pretty good job as a system, as partners, of everyone being very aware. I live in Waltham. I want to give a shout out to Watch CDC. They're doing a terrific job at not only administering their local rental assistance program, but also keeping everybody in the city very well informed about the CDC protections under the core and federal moratorium, and also the availability of rental assistance in the Raft program through Metro. So this little roadmap shows sort of the full map of diversions. The center is kind of where most of the action is that, the state and the administration are really trying to invest in pre-court interventions. The Raft program, which provides direct assistance to landlords of income eligible households, and also the IRMA program, which was launched with CDBG funds and other CARES Act funds that does the same, but for a slightly higher income level, are really the core of the response to try and get that direct aid to those households who need it. And both do offer both rental and mortgage options. There's been a lot about the Raft program, and you're going to hear more about one of our key implementers, Metro Housing Boston. That is kind of the center of the diversion. Of course, there's local rental assistance as well, and I wanted to thank all the partners out there who either launched their own programs using their CPA funds, their home funds, their own CDBG, also, CHAPA and MHP for all the assistance they've given to municipalities to also do that. There are cases where Raft is not enough, IRMA is not enough, and you have to layer those local rental assistance programs on top of each other. And there are situations when maybe eligibility varies and it's more appropriate to go to the local program, or because the rules or the speeds of processing is different and it makes sense to do the local program as opposed to the Raft program. So that even though it's not state funded at this moment in time, is definitely part of that center box of pre-court intervention. And then we launched some new things that we haven't done before with the state. Last week, the Massachusetts Office for Public Collaboration put 7 of their 12 community mediation centers online, or came online to help mediate evictions both in court and before court, and created an opportunity for direct referrals from the Raft agencies and the Housing Consumer Education Centers. They'll be fully ramped up with all 12 centers serving the entire Commonwealth next week. So that is a new offering. And the idea is, of course, to mediate the landlord-tenant disputes before they go to court, or in that situation between the first court meeting and the actual court hearing or trial. Also, a major push to recruit and hire massively expanded legal assistance for income eligible landlords and tenants. That is underway now. The regular legal services that were available prior are available via Zoom in the court, and those are being expanded as quickly as possible as major recruitment happens for pro bono lawyers, paralegals, paid coordinators, social workers, etc. The Tenancy Preservation Program is a court referral program, housing court referral program that's been in existence for a long time. It's had 2 components, an upstream and court program. We've expanded the upstream program to serve broader ranges of population. Generally, families need to have a household member with a disability. So everything in blue was expanded or created new. The whole idea here is to preserve those tenancies, ideally before court, although the courts themselves are driving with their new processes, mediation, driving toward mediation and looking for those same types of agreements, and pushing folks back towards those resources to try and get those agreements and avoid those judgments. So at the same time, though, we can't pretend that every single tenancy is going to be preserved and everyone's going to be okay. We know that's not the fact. So we still have our rapid rehousing programs, home base being the largest one, and then a smaller pilot program in Boston, Brockton, Worcester, Springfield, and Lawrence that gives out slightly less funding. Home base offers $10,000, SPI $3,000. It's all for EA eligible or family shelter eligible families. And then another program called METAR, which is also another $10,000 program to grab folks before they enter the family shelter system. So lots of reforms to the Raft program. Change is happening in real time, and that's very difficult. At the same time, a large volume is coming. We're in the process of creating a landlord application for what we're calling small landlords, or landlords with 20 or fewer units. That's going to be piloted in Springfield and in Lynn and in Berkshire County this week, and will be statewide before the end of this month, because we heard from landlords that they would like to directly address the issue sometimes more proactively rather than waiting for their tenants to apply. We're adding some extra checks into the program integrity, introducing tomorrow data verified income for eligibility, using unemployment systems, Department of Revenue systems, MapHealth, and DTA. Hopefully, a lot of those applications that in the past were challenging to process because there wasn't enough income verification. This gives another release valve and also adds a little bit of extra checks on sort of the fraud, waste, and abuse side of things. And then there's a new Raft benefit level that was written into the supplemental budget back in June and passed, and I'll go a little bit more into that. So I'm gonna skip a lot of this. Just know that our website has been completely overhauled, and we'll send this PDF after. There's also an unlisted page that you can't find that has all those flyers, the social media content, and the different language, and a lot of frequently asked questions for those of you who are interested in those resources. And so make sure you have those links. So just in terms of how it's going, 211 is kind of one of our first lines of defense, and they've seen an incredible increase in volume. And I know that those of you who have called, there have been some, complaints and feedback about, the time that they're calling back, very late at night. They strive for a 24-hour turnaround call. What you can see is that volume has just increased. The total call volume is the yellow line. The green lines are those who press housing. If you would press 1 for housing or press 3 for housing. It's leveling off a little bit, but volume remains high. In terms of what people are calling for assistance about, this reflects the demand that Tim, you just discussed. I would say 3/4 of the callers, if not more, are related to rental assistance, questions about rent protections, and landlord-tenant negotiations. And in terms of where these calls are coming from, Boston, of course, and then a lot of the gateway cities following right behind them. And if you did the same analysis for who Raft is serving, it looks very much the same. The first week, most of the referrals for rental assistance were going to Metro Housing Boston. The second week that we had this data, it actually started going to the Southeast area, NeighborWorks, Housing Solutions. And so I would say, the Lowell area, the Springfield area, the Brockton area, New Bedford, Fall River, the Boston metro area, very high demand, and then the rest of the state following a little bit behind. There are 11 agencies that administer rental assistance on behalf of the state. So I already talked a little bit about the changes in Raft. I just wanted to highlight a really important one, and that's that expanded benefit that goes up to $10,000. So in order to get more than the regular benefit, which is $4,000, we're requiring the landlord and tenant enter into agreement that preserves the tenancy for at least 6 months or until June 2021, whichever date is later if there are school-age children in the house. There are some who are predicting that attaching this type of requirement to the benefit may actually deter landlords from taking it. We think it's actually an incentive, and we're just gonna have to watch that really closely as the months go by. But we really did want to incent stability as much as possible for those higher dollar amounts. And that benefit is available to anyone who has applied since October 19th and anyone whose application was already in process but had not been approved or denied on that date. Talked about mediation, talked about legal help. Just wanted to show you what the dollars look like. I always say 170 million, 170, 171. The largest amount of funds is going to the Raft program, $100 million. Followed by the rapid rehousing programs and then the legal help. And I think that pretty much sums up where we think the investments need to be. How the timeline is working, yes, the moratorium expired in the state in the 19th. The CDC moratorium is still in effect until January. The way that works is that courts may process the cases, but they will not execute a judgment to actually remove anyone from the home until after January. In the meantime, that was all in the yellow. In the meantime, and the green, that's all our programmatic response that I just went through. And we are in a period of ramp up and tons of activity between new programs and expanded programs, major hiring at all the agencies, hundreds of positions being filled very rapidly with the intent for everything to be fully scale and operational by the middle of December so that we're fully ready for January to come. In terms of, I know there might be somebody here from the courts. Filings have remained low for the past few weeks. That's there could be for a number of factors. I like to believe that maybe folks are working it out on their own with each other, entering to agreements or going for those resources. Since June, we've put out about $10.5 million between June and October in Raft and served 3,900 households. But our understanding from the agencies is there are another 11,000 applications still to be processed. So that gets you close to about 15,000 who've at least applied or been served. And you know, the way that we have dedicated our funding, our 100 million could definitely cover those households. But you know, we'll see how far it goes based on how much people need. And this gets to the question of like, what is the gap? What is the actual dollar amount that folks need covered? And that's something we're monitoring very closely in terms of the average benefit levels. Because the existing benefit was only $4,000 to a couple of weeks ago, most people's benefits has been around $3,000, but we expect that to change, of course, now that we've expanded the benefits. So I'm going to stop right here. There's an appendix when you get this, talking about the CDC moratorium and the CARES Act protections for mortgage.
All right, thank you, Amy. That was a lot of really great information. The data is very interesting as well. I wanted to pause and just remind folks that if you have questions, please do put them in the chat. That's where we'll be pulling questions from during the Q&A. We have a couple so far, more logistical about whether these slides will be made available. Yes, MAPC can send these out to everyone who registered for the webinar. We also have a question about whether the link to the hidden resources pages can be posted to the chat now. So any other questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. So unless Amy and Chris, you have anything else to add, I think we'll segue to the other Chris, or one of the other Chris's, Chris Norris, the Executive Director for Metro Housing Boston. We'll hear from him and then we'll pause and we'll take any other questions that have come in through the chat. Thanks, Chris. I think, Chris, you're a co-host. You should be able to unmute yourself and dive right in.
There we go. Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Mark and Karina, for inviting me to participate in this today. Metro Housing Boston is part of the Regional Housing Network of Massachusetts. And like Amy said, one of 11 regional administering agencies for the Residential Assistance for Families in Transition program, the Raft program, as well as for the Emergency Rental and Mortgage Assistance, the IRMA program. And we serve residents of Boston and 28 surrounding communities, but every municipality in the Commonwealth is served by one of the 11 RAAs. Like Amy pointed out in her slide, there are new mediation, legal pieces, a variety of different parts of this eviction diversion initiative, but I'm going to focus specifically on Raft. I'm going to start with a little bit of a quick history. I don't have any fancy slides, so I actually have to talk about it here. Let's see. In all of fiscal year 19, Metro Housing served 1,700 households and awarded $4.4 million. That's over the entire year. Last year, we served 1,800 households and awarded $5.1 million. As of last Friday, since July 1st, we've distributed $4.7 million and served 1,300 households. All of this in only 4 months. And if that rate remained constant, we would serve just shy of 4,000 households this fiscal year, an increase of 117% from last year. But like Tim and Sarah's data showed, demand has not remained constant. It has increased. At Metro, we've seen some dramatic changes since March. They're not necessarily reflective of the rest of the state, but I do know that demand is up across the state. And mostly we're seeing this where there's a large disparity between incomes and housing costs, as well as gateway cities. And that seems to be universal across the Commonwealth. What we've seen at Metro, as far as demand, is that our program participation increased by more than 75% in the fourth quarter of fiscal year 20 compared to the third quarter. And as a result, in October, we had a backlog of about 3,500 cases. Amy mentioned the 11,000 backlog across the state, 3,500 of them are right here at Metro. Those aren't necessarily complete applications. I think that's important to note, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. There are also more than 1,000 applications that are currently in process. They're already assigned to case managers who are working on them. Just those applications alone, between the backlog, the cases we're working on, would take us to where we were last year, assuming nothing else came in. And unfortunately, we're not lucky enough to have nothing else coming in. We're receiving on average 100 new applications every day that are being submitted. Those aren't the duplicates. Those aren't the incomplete ones. These are submitted applications, 100 every day just at Metro. I did speak with Rob Corley at NeighborWorks the other day, and he's seeing about the same average. So that data showing NeighborWorks and Metro there with the significant demand is definitely accurate. Another change that we have seen is an increase in households that don't have subsidies coming to us for assistance. Before the pandemic, only about 29% of the households that came in to Metro didn't have a subsidy, and now that's up to 50%. And you know, for us, that's a huge increase given what we've seen historically with the program. The other point I'd like to make is that people with extremely low incomes utilize Raft. Folks don't wake up in the morning and decide, hey, I want to go commit fraud today. I'm making $100,000. Let me wait in line for 3 months and then apply for this program and see how quickly you can get to me. The median income of the folks that we served last year was less than $15,000 for a family of 3. And because of the pandemic, those who are the folks in unsubsidized housing, their median income had been $29,000. In May and June, that income fell to zero for folks that were in unsubsidized housing who were coming in for assistance. So that's sort of the background. You know, where are we? Where were we? Where are we? In terms of steps that are being taken now, it's important. We know we have to respond to applicants promptly, and we know that because of the sheer number that we, at least at Metro, have not been doing that. We're lucky to be working with DHCD and partners like the neighborhood developers in Chelsea, Asian CDC, Watch in Waltham, and others to make that happen by increasing capacity. We started the year with 15 staff, and as of next week, we will have more than 40, and we're continuing to increase. And you know, we are doing that with a combination of temporary staff and permanent staff, but it's already having an impact. Just last week alone, we were able to contact 900 households out of that backlog. And we're going to do more this week because 15 more people started today. And they already have their computers and they're on their way home to begin making calls. Before the end of the month, we will have contacted everyone who has submitted an application to Metro. And at the same time, we plan to stay current on all newly submitted applications. We've also shifted, and this is a major change for us. We've shifted from a first come, first served approach to one where completed applications are going to go first, along with emergency situation where the tenant is facing imminent eviction. In addition to the demand, which is up everywhere, the primary challenge that all of the RAAs face is getting the necessary documentation. I talked earlier about those applications that are submitted that the majority of which aren't complete. And that holds true now. And we spend anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks, or have historically, trying to gather that information, whether it's from the tenant or whether it's from the property owner, needing identification, the statement of the housing crisis, whether it's related to COVID, documentation of income. All of those things take time. There's a joint application for IRMA and Raft as far as program information that I want to cover. And the case manager is going to determine the appropriate program and the source of funds. Folks don't have to say, I'm applying for IRMA or I'm applying for the 10,000 subsection of Raft. Folks don't have to know that. They just have to submit their application. And anyone can go to mahousinghelp.com to find the administering agency for the city or town where the applicant lives. And they can click the link and they'll be taken directly to the application for that region that's being administered by the RAA that's there. Overall, Raft income must be less than 50% of the area median income, which ranges from about 34,000 for a family of 3 in New Bedford to a high of about 53,000 for a family of 3 in the Boston-Cambridge area. IRMA, the Mortgage and Rental Assistance Program, has a higher income limit. Folks can go up to 80% of area median income. And again, that ranges from 55,000 or so up to 80,000 for a family of 3. And like we heard a couple of weeks ago, Raft was increased to allow for up to $10,000 in certain circumstances. We've been working closely with DHCD to attempt to streamline the program, and that we don't know how that's going to work. We're all in this together. We're moving forward. We're going to do the best we can. We're going to watch the data. There is some concern among the administering agencies about unintended consequences, and that we could actually see some of these pieces end up taking more time rather than less. For example, to get the $10,000, a tenant must be spending at least 30% of their income for rent, and we have a new income determination calculator to use. We will we'll be implementing that. Also, the tenant has to be able to remain, the landlord has to agree to keep the tenant in the property for a minimum of 6 months or until June 30th if there are school-aged children in the households, even if the Raft payment doesn't cover the arrears. And that's where Amy mentioned that there's some question on whether this is going to be an incentive for owners to participate because it's better than nothing, or whether owners are going to want to take their chances in housing court. So time will tell on that. Another opportunity to gather more data. Additionally, for folks that are seeking 4,000 or less, they have to now demonstrate sustainability. This isn't something that's in the line item. It's not something that is required by the legislature, but it is something that is being implemented. And the household has to demonstrate that they have the ability to meet their housing costs going forward. DHCD has encouraged flexibility with this, and a plan to increase income or decrease expenses is adequate. And so again, there's just lots of pieces that feed into this. I could go on, but I'm going to wait for the questions. I'm not going to go into more of the details on that. I've probably done too much already in terms of detail. What I will say as I wrap up, though, is there are still a lot of unknowns. We don't know what's going to happen when the CDC moratorium ends on December 31st. We don't know if, given the election, it's going to end on December 31st. We have the House Ways and Means budget that was released the other day. It's going to be debated tomorrow. And there is a outside section in there that would prevent evictions from being executed if a Raft application is in process and hasn't been decided on. We don't know if the House is going to pass that as is. We don't know whether the Senate is going to include it. That's another unknown, but it could make a huge difference in terms of folks' stability if they didn't have to worry about being evicted while a Raft application was pending. And then finally, again, back to the election results, we don't know what a new stimulus bill is going to look like or when it might pass. And if folks are getting $300 a week, we're going to see a different demand than if it remains where it is now at 0. So a lot still to be determined. Happy to be working together with DHCD and MAPC and other folks on this. And we're going to face it as it comes, and we're going to continue to work with all of you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'll pause and let people process some of that for a minute or two. I see a couple of questions coming in the chat. Mark, I also don't know if you had a kickoff question you wanted to pose first. Oh, you're muted, Mark. There you go.
Sorry. Karina, if there are questions in the chat from members of the audience, I would take a few of those first. I do have a question. If you can fit me in, that's fine, but I want to make sure other people get a chance.
Great. So we have the first question that's come in is about if a client doesn't hear back from you and they applied in August, will they hear by the end of November? Can you speak to that timeline?
Sure, they should. Initially, anyone who submits an application and actually presses send, we found a number of folks, particularly those in articles recently, that hadn't submitted their application and it was sitting there but hadn't been submitted to us. If someone has submitted their application, they receive a response automatically that says, thank you, your application has been received. And yes, by the end of November, we should have at least reached out to every one of those applicants and they should have heard from us. There is another change, which is, you heard me say earlier, but it's been taking between 3 and 5 weeks historically for us to get the documentation. Folks are going to have 2 weeks to provide the documentation to us. And after 2 weeks, the application is going to be denied and we'll move on to the next application. Folks can reapply. It doesn't stop people from reapplying, but we're not going to be keeping cases open for months at a time while we wait for one document at a time to come in.
Okay, I see. Thank you. Another question about Raft assistance and eligibility for roommate households.
I see that. I believe the answer is yes. Amy's nodding, so I got that part right. I know we've seen this particularly, obviously, like the person here said, in Medford, but we've also seen it in Chelsea. We've seen it in other communities where we have that type. And DHCD has been very flexible in terms of trying to make the program work based on the needs of the particular community where it's being utilized.
Great, that's good to hear. The last question that we have teed up in the chat is about whether an applicant should have their service provider apply for them. Is that preferred?
It shouldn't matter. The key is that the application be complete. And some of the partners that we're working with, we've trained, they're going to be doing more data entry as well to process the cases, not just sending them and then adding to the backlog. So having a complete application makes all the difference. If folks are able to do that with a service provider, that's wonderful. If they're able to do it alone, that's wonderful. There shouldn't be any difference in processing time once we're caught up, but the key is that it's complete.
Okay. Then a follow-up on the roommate question, would a single roommate apply to be eligible, or could more than one roommate in a household apply?
I don't know the answer. I am going to hypothesize and say, to the extent each of them were responsible for a portion of the rent and could document it, that both would be eligible not to exceed the total rent by definition or their portion. So if someone's only paying X amount, they're not going to get, the full 4,000 if it's not needed or warranted by the circumstances.
Okay, Mark, I think we have time for another question here.
Thank you. And thanks again to Chris and Amy and Chris for participating. I have 2 questions. One relates to the court process and the other relates to what's going on in the legislature. So I guess I have a question regarding each branch of government. There seems to be some differing opinions about how quickly the courts are going to execute judgments. I know that, Amy, you suggested maybe mid-late December earlier. I've heard sometimes January because it's likely to be after the possible expiration of the federal moratorium. But then I've heard from other folks on the municipal level that they are concerned or hearing feedback that the court judgments could be coming in the next few weeks. And that may not sound like a big difference, but of course it is, especially as we're all trying to stand up these incredibly challenging and complex programs. So that's question number 1, is there any way to get more of an alignment about when the court actions are likely to occur? And I recognize I'm asking members of the executive branch, not the judicial branch, but I know you're talking to each other. The second question relates to the House Ways and Means budget. I know it came out and people were somewhat concerned about some of the elements of the Raft language. I know Rep. Honan, my good friend, has filed an amendment to try and address some of these issues and move Raft more quickly because the program is often, fairly slow to make sure that we preserve the funding, that we eliminate any possibility of fraudulent behavior. But right now, we have a need to move money fast. And I'm wondering if you folks can provide, either from DHCD or from Metro Housing Boston, a perspective on this debate in the House, because many of us are trying to figure out how to be engaged right now, since this debate is taking place tomorrow. Thank you. Two very simple questions.
Very simple. Wish somebody from the courts was here. I think we don't know exactly when the COVID-related cases are going to hit the court system. We do know that the pre-COVID cases are going first. And the speed at which those are moving is kind of week-to-week check-in. Filings, which would of course be post-COVID, because you couldn't do it until October 19th or 14 days after October 19th. If you were really on top of your game and issued your notice to quit right away, are well below the norm for this time last year. It doesn't mean they're going to stay that way. We could also just be seeing a delay between notice to quits and time passage, or maybe folks are waiting to see how quickly the courts move, or if they can get assistance. But to date, and this could change this week, we're not seeing a ton of new filings. That could change any moment. That tidal wave that everyone's talking about could come, but we haven't seen it yet. And I think the only thing to do is monitor on a week-to-week basis. I did want to clarify something I said earlier, is that the housing court is processing the cases, but not executing the judgments. If you are under the CDC moratorium, which means that the household would have had to submit the declaration, the official declaration, to their landlord. But the district court may not even hear those cases till after January. So it's a very interesting situation where even courts aren't exactly interpreting things the same. All this to say, it's very difficult to know what's going to happen. And the best thing to do is just keep following it on a week-to-week basis and stay very closely informed. I thought the courts were putting a public-facing dashboard on filings. That might be up, it might not be up. I know that they intend to do that. I cannot speak to the debate in the House right now. So if anyone else wants to jump in, go for it.
But I can, not being part of the administration. I'll say that the Regional Housing Network is supporting Chairman Honen's amendment number 595 that would do some of the streamlining and add additional language that we think would be beneficial to the program and the folks applying to use the funds.
And can you say, Chris, just what a couple of things are that that amendment is attempting to address?
Sure, I can, as soon as I pull it up here on my screen. It would create an eviction diversion initiative fund and authorize 30 million for it. It would direct DHCD to use a, quote, short, simple application with minimal processing time. It would remove the sustainability requirement and allow Raft to be used more effectively during the pandemic when folks are facing that economic uncertainty. It would specifically allow for self-certification of income under pains and penalties of perjury. It would allow the Raft benefit to be used more flexibly to achieve stability, and it would continue any prior authorization to allow funds appropriated for Raft to continue forward to ensure they don't revert at the end of the fiscal year.
Well, much more conversation about this can happen over the course of the next few days, but I just wanted people to be at least aware of that discussion. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, everyone. We have the start of a good discussion here. I want to transition, jumping down to the local level now. We have a great panel of speakers to hear from. I'll ask them a question each. We have about 5 or so minutes for each of you, and then we'll open it back up for Q&A on this topic. So we're going to start with Domonique Williams, who's the Deputy Director of the Office of Housing Stability for the City of Boston. Domonique, can you please give us an overview of how OHS is preparing for January 1 and what tools you're using to respond to housing needs intensified by the pandemic?
Sure. Thank you very much, Karina, for inviting me to speak today. As you said, Domonique Williams, Office of Housing Stability is under the City of Boston umbrella, and generally our mission is just to help Boston residents find and maintain safe, stable, and affordable housing. On an average day, we do tracking of evictions, we help to create resources and connect people to either legal resources, financial assistance, or mediation to preserve their housing. So since that's what we do on a regular day, we're really in a unique position to kind of meet this moment in time where health needs are intersecting with housing needs. Two things that we've done that we're very proud of and excited about is first, we just were able to pass unanimously through the Boston City Council, the Housing Stability Notification Act. The Notification Act requires all landlords and foreclosing owners to provide information about resources that tenants can access if they're being evicted or if their lease is ending. So we've created the document. It actually gives information about legal help or rental arrearage payments that folks can find online, and we've translated that into 11 different languages. The second piece that's important about that Notification Act is it requires landlords to provide our office when that notice to quit is delivered to the tenant. So that will also help us to continue to do that tracking ongoing. The second thing that our office has been able to do is to push a housing stability pledge for landlords. So that was announced by Mayor Walsh on October 8th, and it just requires landlords to do 4 things. I took notes. So first, to abide by that CDC moratorium to make sure that they're working with their tenants to prevent an eviction prior to 12/31. Engaging with tenants to make sure that they're creating a payment plan that has fair and balanced terms, that takes into account potential for lost wages or for unexpected health costs. Third, to accept rental assistance or to accept Raft or our city's rental relief fund. And then finally, also to make sure that tenants are applying for rental adjustments for Section 8 or MRVP units. So far we've had 42 landlords sign on to that pledge, and we're hoping for more. As the moratorium comes to an end, I think we're all just kind of trying to staff up, and we've put a robust plan in place. We've made sure that in addition to those 2 pieces, we've opened up our rental relief fund that has an additional $8 million on top of the first 2 rounds of rental relief that were announced back in April and June. The 3rd round just opened up in October. So we're full steam ahead on trying to get the word out about those things. And then also making sure that, kind of like Amy was saying, just making sure that our website is updated. It has information that tenants can try to access very quickly. We sent out a 46,000 piece mailer for Boston residents, so that way they can just kind of quickly scan a QR code, which bumps them over to our website to get that information. So we're full steam ahead, and just hoping to be able to assist as many people as possible.
Great, thank you. Oh, we're gonna add more.
Oh no, I'll wait for the questions. I see some questions popping up in the box, but I will follow your lead.
There are quite a few questions coming in. I think given the way the timing's going, we have time to pause for some brief responses to these. If you wanna go ahead, and then we'll move on, and people can add more questions for Domonique or other speakers as they come up.
Sure, it looks like the first one is pretty easy. I can go ahead and add the Notification Act and the pledge into the chat box. I'll do that in just a second when the next speaker goes on. Any incentive for the landlord to sign the pledge? Any benefit for doing so? No, not necessarily. We've got CDCs and affordable housing providers in addition to just private landlords who've signed on to it. I think this is a really unique moment in time where we are trying to stress the fact that our communities are not going to make it out of this crisis intact without just working together and without making sure that we're all doing our part, whether that's working with tenants who cannot afford to pay the rent, working with programs like Raft or like our rental relief or municipal relief funds to accept that back rent, and really just trying to make sure that we're all are doing our part. So no incentive, but there's the hope there. that they will abide by it. Sign on.
And did you want to answer or try to answer the question about whether there's any indication of how that process of alerting tenants of these resources is going with local landlords versus real estate investment trusts?
Sure. So we just implemented the Housing Stability Notification Act. It was just signed into law by Mayor Walsh on Thursday. So the word is getting out there. We have received a couple of calls, inquiries from lawyers first, a few private landlords as well, asking for the resources that they need to deliver to tenants. So the word is getting out, and we're hopeful that with an additional press release that's going to happen on Thursday with the signing of the act and generating of support from the advocate community, that notification will increase.
Great. And I think there was one more question that came in about how many units those landlords you've been working with cover.
That's a really good question. I couldn't speak to that specifically. I do know that we do have some of the largest landlords and property management companies in Boston who have signed on. Some who have signed on, even before the pledge existed. BHA in Boston had committed to forestalling evictions through the end of the year, as have some of our other large property managers. So we're suspecting that that's going to cover a large swath of affordable housing in the city.
I think taking a cue, or at least in the same vein, I know Mass Housing has been working with some major property owners, developers that they finance on a similar pledge. I think that amounts to about 40,000 units across the Commonwealth, and the pledge has to do with doing everything in their power to avoid eviction, abide by the CDC moratorium for however long it's in play, accept rental assistance, and so on and so forth.
Sounds very similar.
All right, so I think we'll turn to Chris Cotter now. Chris, if you're ready to tell us a bit about Cambridge's local eviction moratorium and the timeline for that, and any other efforts to increase housing stability that the city is undertaking or thinking about undertaking.
Sure. Thank you, Karina, and thanks to everyone for sharing this. This is really helpful to hear what's happening at state level, and I think informative to understand what's happening in other communities. Certainly, I'm happy to talk about what we've been doing here and what we have been seeing. So the eviction moratorium is one of three major initiatives that we've tried to have moving ahead here to deal with the impacts of the pandemic. The moratorium was first issued in April and put in place as a health and safety measure to limit the ability of managers or owners to levy on executions that were issued by the court. So really not getting involved with the court process, not getting involved with the eviction process, but saying at the end of that process, if there is an execution for a resident, that execution cannot be issued in Cambridge. And I think it's similar to what was done in Somerville. The idea being really to keep people in their homes, given the stability that folks have in their housing as compared to those folks who are facing a move out as a result of an eviction. So really, at the end of the day, it prevents the move outs there, which was the key piece for evictions. The other piece that was included in this, what was a temporary emergency order issued by the city manager and the director of public health, was limiting access to units. So limiting owners' access to tenant homes only for emergencies, stopping showings of occupied units, again, just to keep people in their homes and to try to minimize the disruptions in the number of folks that might be looking to get into their homes. So this order, as I said, was issued in April. It was amended in July. The eviction provisions remain in place. The provisions regarding access to units were modified somewhat in July. So there is now a protocol for owners or managers to get into occupied units with limits on the number of people, limits on time, limits on the hours in which they can access the unit and the reasons for that. But it does give owners and managers an ability to get into the unit. with the exception for households who are vulnerable, who can decline that entry. So that is the eviction moratorium temporary emergency order that remains in place. It will be in place, for so long as it is there. Until further notice, it will be there. So certainly, if we see executions coming from the courts in Cambridge, that will likely be the end of it, as the move-outs, the executions, the levying on the executions will not be possible with the local order. So a couple other things just to mention in terms of the local response. One of the things that we've done is coordinate very closely with other housing agencies in the city. And I'd say that there are a number of city departments that we're all working at different parts of this response, including the Department of Human Services programs, the Multi-Service Center for the Homeless, the City Manager's Office, the Office of the Housing Liaison, the Cambridge Housing Authority, all the affordable housing providers. We're all meeting regularly to look at what the impact is, to try to understand and to reach out and connect people with resources. I can say that the work of the Housing Authority has been instrumental in keeping folks with vouchers in their homes. The way that they have turned around the interim research to help people with job loss or loss of income reduce their rent has been incredibly helpful for folks with subsidies or who are in affordable units. And then the city has stepped up with a lot of resources to fund, to stand up and to fund an emergency housing assistance program, actually 2 programs. We launched the first effort in April with funds that were donated through the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund, and we're able to have funding out on the street in April to help people with up to 2 months of rent or their mortgage costs for owners of limited equity homes with deed restrictions. And in that time, through that program, helped almost 1,500 residents, distributing more than $3 million of funding to help keep people in their homes and to deal with household needs. That program offered both housing assistance as well as funding to help people with household costs. So there are a lot of folks that we saw, particularly folks in subsidized units with vouchers, would come in and where they were paying 30% of their income for housing, they didn't need the housing assistance, but they did need the assistance with the typical household costs. So there were a lot of folks that were assisted with that through that first effort. And then in July, we launched our second program, which is now continues to be available. We call it the Housing Stabilization Program. It really is a successor program to our initial Mayor's Fund program, this time funded with CDBG CARES Act funds and with CPA, and again, offered to income eligible renters into owners of deed restricted affordable homes. In this case, we've changed the approach a little bit, where we're now looking at folks that are severely cost burdened and trying to bring them down to that 30% threshold to keep where housing would be affordable to them. And that program was funded with $1.5 million of the $1.5 million of a combination of CPA and CARES Act funding. So that is there. It continues to be available. We launched it, as I said, in July, offering up to 2 months of housing assistance. We several weeks ago doubled that to now provide up to 4 months of housing assistance, again, to try to scale it to what the need is and respond to what the issues that we're seeing in the community. And it is, there are a lot of folks, as I think Chris mentioned at Metro, there's a lot of process to it. We're now trying to comply with the requirements of block grant and CPA. So there's a fair amount of paperwork that's involved, and sometimes applications do take a little bit of time to get through. But we have several hundred residents that are now either have been assisted or in the process to receive funds through that program. The last thing I'd mention, similar to Domonique, is the recent adoption of a tenant rights and resources notification ordinance. We started to put this together over the summer. The City Council passed it in early September, and it became effective on October 14th. It sounds like it's very similar to what Boston has, where it will require that owners or managers of homes, when they begin the process to terminate a tenancy, provide notice of tenant rights and responsibilities and housing resources, most importantly, the numbers and the websites and the information about city programs, the Multi-Service Center for the Homeless, the Office of the Housing Liaison, the Cambridge Housing Authority, the Community Development Department, to try to connect people with the resources and support, both to help them through the process, but then also to look at where they might be eligible for funds to help with an arrears to try to prevent that eviction. So that just became effective. It is now in place. I should say it also applies to residents at their initial lease up. So when you sign a lease in Cambridge with a new unit, you should be getting that information. We have that information, the packet of information, along with the overview and the ordinance up on our website. Happy to share that if anyone would like to see it. I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay, so I think we'll take one question for you in the chat, and then if other questions come in, we'll take them after we hear from our other two speakers. So this is a question about whether there's been any violation of your local eviction moratorium in terms of landlords showing the property, and if so, how do you deal with that? How are you enforcing the local moratorium?
Sure. So I'm not aware of any violations of the moratorium in terms of the levying on the execution. I think we're not at the point where we're seeing those executions issued from the court. And when we get to that point, we'll certainly be aware and be ready to step in. And that could come from any number of places, but certainly it's the authority of the manager that issued the order. So, the Community Development Department, Inspectional Services, the Multi-Service Center, any city department might hear the concern and the complaint, and then we would certainly look to intervene with the owner or the manager to make sure that they're aware of the moratorium. One of the other things that we've done is we've tried to be in regular communication with owners and managers, certainly the larger owners, about what the state of our approach is, what's in place, what's not. So when we had the moratorium, we would push that out to managers and owners. We're trying to get that out to residents as well, so they're aware. Likewise with the notification ordinance, just to make sure that people know what the backdrop is, and with that know if and when there are issues, who to contact in the housing realm here, whether it's CDD or the manager's office. With regard to the landlord showing the property, we did have some concerns from residents who would call with that, owners or managers who are not familiar with that. And so simple, typical education, talking with folks to make sure they understood that. And then, it got to the point where I think they did, but they were then saying, well, how do we show vacant units? How do we, plan to turn a unit over? So with that, we made some changes to that order in July to allow for a path for that.
All right, thank you, Chris. It's a good segue to Keith Benoit, the Community Development Planner in Northampton. Slightly smaller city further west. Very interested in what you guys are doing to share resources and get the word out to residents. And also in your efforts to stand up shelter spaces and other kinds of spaces to meet the needs for people who are homeless.
Sure. So I took the job during the pandemic, so I don't know what's normal. And we're a very small entitled community. We're one of the smallest in the state. So I'm in charge of the CDBG funds. So I think for me, I looked at, there's a bunch of people that maybe have never used any of these financial resources before, or going to shelters. You see lines of cars at the door going to the soup kitchen. So I think that, for me, that's where I went to. So I work with Wayfinders and some of the other organizations, and had them print out the flyers, and I'll put those into soup kitchen meals. And at the survival center, they're giving out bags of food. That was one avenue. The other avenue is reach out to the school department, and they're more than happy to put a digital flyer in their newsletter. And the same with the library. The library out here is very active. It's a place where a lot of people go for information, use their internet or charge their phone. Some of them are homeless, but just normal families. It's a very popular place. So other things we really did is we have this group called the Next Step Collaborative, and it's a lot of public services that get CDBG funding, but it's also just community advocates, different organizations, and we meet every month for the last 25 years, not maybe 25 years, but the organization. So that was a natural kind of a way to share information, and they're on the streets. They're working with people that are English as second language. So that's another opportunity. And then I did say update our website, and I look at the offices of housing stability in Somerville and Cambridge, and this is a wealth of information. And there's almost too much information, and I deal with this every day. So think about people who are brand new to this, trying to consolidate that and make it something they can download, or but you don't want to blast them with too much information. And then the shelter side, I think we have like a three-pronged approach. One is there's only one isolation or quarantine shelter in Everett right now. And it's great if you can get out there, but for us, the 4 counties in Western Massachusetts, it's too far of a drive. And for someone who's maybe homeless or in between housing situations, just to be told, get on a bus and go to Everett, Mass. So our mayor is working with the mayors of the 4 Western Mass counties and really pushing the state to get another isolation quarantine bed out here. We know that COVID is increasing. We're thankful for this warm weather, but this warm weather is not going to last. And then, so that's non-congregate shelter. And then for a congregate shelter, again, warm right now, but we're in the final stages of talking to someone about a winter shelter here. We're a little late for that, I think, but that's happening. And, we talk about this as being a regional effort. The Amherst Survival Center, the Amherst Craig's Doors, it's a warming shelter, but also there are 6 pigs in Amherst, or East Hampton, they closed. And although there's only 6 beds for us out here, that really hurts us, because those people are going to come to the shelters that are here. So we need to think about, a regional solution, regional collaboration. I think that's why we're all on this here. So, and then something that maybe most of you have been working on is municipal vulnerable MVP grant. We're trying to get a day shelter, a living room type situation. Again, it seems like there's a lot more homeless people. There's a lot more people in the street because they cannot go to their day shelters. They can't go to the library, so they're out. And we're seeing, people are not feeling safe, but also those people are out in the elements. And really what a day shelter is to get people out of the elements, give them services they can, let them take a shower, and some sort of locker where they can keep their items. So it's, unfortunately, it's a good time to buy property right now because there's so many empty spaces. But if we can't get a grant, there might be some sort of creative financing to get that unit, but it's not going to be ready for this winter for sure. That's all I got.
Thank you, Keith. All right, we'll keep things moving. Last but definitely not least, we have Chelsea City Manager Tom Ambrosino with us. I know Chelsea's been hit quite hard by COVID and is doing a lot to respond, particularly on the housing front. I wanted to start things off by asking about Chelsea Eats, because I think we're all very interested in how innovative that program is. And so if you could talk a bit about the process to develop it and what it looks like, that'd be great.
So thanks, Karina. So we've done a couple I just want to mention that Chelsea's done some traditional support for the housing problem. We have, like other cities and towns, we've done a local rental assistance program. We did a first round in June, providing rental assistance for up to 3 months of back rent. We're going to do a second round this fall, and both rounds we had about $1.25 million set aside. We were able to help in the spring 302 families. We should be able to help about the same amount here in the fall. We also put out an RFP and have stood up with some local attorneys, a local Chelsea Legal Aid Bureau to help people who are facing eviction. We refer them to this local legal aid bureau that is supported by the city. Will hopefully be supplemented by some legal assistance that the state is providing. And then finally, we do expect in the next week or so to do a contract with our local service agency that's working with Metro Housing on the Raft program, the neighborhood developers. We're going to provide them with some direct funding to add some staffing specifically so that they can process more expeditiously applications coming from Chelsea residents. So those are sort of traditional ways we're trying to help in this housing field. You mentioned Chelsea Eats, which is a little bit non-traditional. So Chelsea Eats is a food insecurity effort, but most of the people who are facing housing insecurity are also facing food insecurity in Chelsea. So this is a way to provide assistance to the same individuals in many respects, perhaps freeing up some money for them to make rental payments by providing them with some food assistance. So Chelsea Eats is a debit card program. It was sort of born out of necessity. The city has been running our own daily food pantry lines in Chelsea every day since the middle of April. That's in addition to private nonprofits that are also doing their own food pantries on a daily basis. But we've been doing them here in the city. We felt pretty early on that we had to get out of this business as a municipality for two main reasons. One, we just felt this was such an undignified way for people to get help. We had long food lines. We're giving them heavy boxes. In many cases, people are carrying these boxes on foot blocks to their homes. So they were waiting in line 2-3 hours in heat, now in the cold. And we wanted to find a better way, a more efficient way to deliver support to these people. The second thing is we were spending a lot of money on non-food related items. So lots of money the city was spending on transportation, transporting food to the city. And then we were spending a lot of money on temporary employees to break down the pallets, put them in 30-pound boxes, and then be at the distribution center to hand out the boxes. So we wanted, for many reasons, to get out of this business, and we figured we could transition to a system where we just gave a debit card to people and they could then go and meet their food needs when and where they felt they could do it best. And so it's taken a lot of time. We transitioned so once we decided to do this, we partnered with a debit card company out of New York called PEX, and they're affiliated with Visa. And the idea, and so we partnered with them. We put out notice to everyone waiting in our food lines and to the whole city that we were transitioning to the system. We did it by a lottery. So we provided a very simple application for folks. The only requirement to apply to the lottery was that you A, lived in Chelsea, and B, you had annual income of 30% of AMI or less. So it was a very simple one-page application. It was a self-certification. There was no proof of income. Well, we didn't require any of that. We received about 3,900 applications. We did a lottery. It was a weighted lottery, so you got more chance to win the lottery if you had children and were a large family, if you had deep levels of poverty. So you got extra points if you were just under 30% AMI, but actually under the federal poverty level. You got extra chances if you were disabled, if you were a veteran, if you were elderly. We had all sorts of categories to give you extra chances to win the lottery. But the best chance you had is if you had a large family. And so we did the lottery in the middle of September. We awarded cards to 2,074 recipients. And those people will soon be getting a debit card. The card, we identified how much we were going to allow for this program on a monthly basis. So we've allocated $750,000 a month to this program. That allows us to give 2,000 plus cards out. We have enough local money from the city to do the next 2 months. So we should be able to cover through the middle of January, assuming we can give cards out in the next week or so. And then we have philanthropic dollars that will cover the card for the months of January and February. So we expect to get people who have this card through the middle of March with money for food. You'll get a family of 3 or more will get $400 a month on this card. Now, this will supplement, a lot of people are eligible for SNAP or WIC, so this will just supplement that. but we expect to distribute the cards. We're hopeful that we'll have the cards in our hand in the next week, and we hope to get them distributed before Thanksgiving, although that's a little iffy. We've had a lot of trouble, but we've been delayed in large part because of red tape at Visa. They took a long, long time to approve the program. And now we've got a little bit of logistical challenges with our debit card partner because they have a few hurdles to go through before they can manufacture the card. But we do expect to work through the remaining problems this week. And I'm hoping we're going to have physical plastic in our hand to distribute sometime early next week. And that's the program in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. Very, very interesting and exciting. All right, so one last call for questions. We have a few more minutes. I know there were some that came in earlier for Domonique, so I'll circle back to those. Domonique, there was a question about once the landlord signs this pledge, is there anything to stop them from not abiding by it? And there was also a request to potentially share the list of landlords that have signed on, with the thinking being that some of them might have properties in other communities in our region or Commonwealth.
Sure. I think I did post the link to the landlord pledge in the chat. That link also should connect to a list of landlords who have gone ahead and signed it. In terms of enforcement for any potential violation, it's really an honor pledge. I mean, if you say you're going to do something, then we're hoping that for the most part that, especially since a lot of the folks who have signed on are people who are partners through CDCs or other affordable housing programs, will actually be people of their word and uphold that.
Yeah, let's hope so. Other questions for anyone, either our local panelists or Chris or Amy or Tim? Last call. All right, I cannot believe we got through everything in 90 minutes. This is a true testament to how knowledgeable our speakers are and able to condense information, a lot of complicated information. There are a lot of great resources linked in the chat. I will be sending those around, as well as the presentations, to everyone who registered for this event. And there will also be video of it on the MAPC website, and I'll include that URL in the follow-up email as well. I want to thank all of our speakers immensely for taking the time, particularly when everyone is so slammed, to come here and talk about their work. So Tim Reardon, Chris Kluchman, Chris Norris, Chris Cotter, Domonique Williams, Tom Ambrosino, Keith Noit. I think that's everyone. And Amy Steitley as well. Thank you, Amy. That was a ton of information. You might get the award for most information in least amount of time for this event. So thank you, everyone. Please keep an eye out for future COVID webinars from MAPC. This is an ongoing series, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night.